Yep, I'm ready. All right, so welcome to everyone who has not been with us before. I'd like to welcome you all to our Diversified Planning Solutions Mentoring Forum. This is our third installment of our series. Today we're going to be having Mark Edwards talk about claiming as a couple, the part one of two. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for joining us and thank Cal Lutheran for sponsoring this Mentoring Forum series, specifically the Cal Lutheran Financial Planning Program. And so with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to our host today, Terry Bradford Crane, who's going to introduce Mark Edwards.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We are fortunate to have Mark with us today. He has over 30 years of investment management experience. He spent 11 years at the Minnesota State Board of Investment, where he managed internal equities and oversaw the trading desk. He spent the next 20 years after that as a managing partner at the Plexus Group, where he consulted with mutual funds, money managers, brokers, and pension funds on process management, quantitative management, and trading. He has written numerous articles for both the Journal of Portfolio Management and for the Financial Analyst Journal. So, Mark, thank you so much for being here today, and we're ready to learn.
Thank you, Terry. So I'm assuming, I was assuming that there was going to be a few more outside people because most of the people who are going to be watching this should be relatively young. Everybody's relatively young relative to me. But the question is, why should I be talking about Social Security, given the fact that most of you are far, far away from that? But the reality is most of your clients are approaching their 60s, or that you will have clients who are approaching this issue, and you're going to have people in their 40s and 50s who are going to have to start thinking about this. So when I was researching articles for a retirement income course, one of the things that I came across was this increasing discussion about the risk of people outliving their income or outliving their financial assets, and that the majority of retirees end up with Social Security as their primary income source after a while, supplemented, of course, by Medicare, Medicaid, residual assets, and then family support. And of course, that leads into that whole trap of the sandwich generations and everything else. So is it really a legitimate or valid concern or a valid fear? Greg, do you want me to tell you when to go to the next slide? Okay. So here's part of the reality, is that the median mortality for a woman who's 65 years old today is going to be 90 years old. Median is greater than mean. So over 50% of women today who are 65 are going to live beyond 90. And if we're thinking about it as a couple, the median age for the last to die, couples kind of keep each other sustained, is closer to 95 years old, okay? So when I think about that, there's always this trap that we make in investment or in retirement planning that we use 20 to 25 years. But that's really quite unrealistic. People are going to live much longer than that. So here's some data that I found that looked at the poverty rate just in the US for understanding what goes on. And, one of the things that we find is that for people, as they age, is this second layer from 65, 69, 70, 79, and 80 years plus. For women, the reality is, a lot of women, by the time we get to be in our 80s, are going to be widowed. And there really is a problem. Would you go back again to that slide? Are going to run out of money. And we can see it down at the bottom slide where we see with widowed and divorced women, again, they suffer much greater levels of poverty. Again, this is just in the US. And the last reality is that over the past 30 years, the median age for women, for the longevity for women has gone up by 2 years, for men by 4 years. Well, I can tell you, by the time people in their 30s are in their 60s, it's going to have gone up a few more years. So the problem's just going to get worse. Okay. So the problem that we run into in this situation is that wives still in this day and age end up earning less than their husbands, okay? Or you have one spouse who earns less than their other spouse. And that's the theme that I want to talk about, is when you're thinking about this as a couple. One of the partners will outlive their other partner, and the average length of widowhood goes up to 14 years. And by 85, only 13% of women still have a spouse. So click again. Can it? And again, there you go. And here comes the really insidious part, is that husbands, they don't consider survivor benefits at all when filing for Social Security. They file at 62 or when they retire, but it never comes up what are going to be the implications on the other survivor. So they base their claiming age often on pensions. You know, do they have a pension? Then they want to file. Or do they have Medicare insurance or pre-Medicare health insurance? Are they getting incentivized by their companies to leave early, or are they having health issues? So this is what people claim, but there's other reasons that people will claim. And the other problem is that people will tap into, will delay tapping into qualified plans, and they'll claim early, which is just backwards of what they should. I'll talk about that later in my next one. So go ahead, Greg. So when do people claim? This is a lesson in anchoring. People tend to claim primarily when they're at 62, the first point that they can claim. So the other place is this traditional thinking that they should claim when they actually retire. Oftentimes that becomes that magic number of 65. And the other problem is that when they look at Social Security documents, the Social Security documents also highlight the age of 62 and then what we call full retirement age. So people are going to naturally claim there, and very few people claim after age 66. Next slide. So a couple terms before we move on. One is I will use FRA, full retirement age. This is the age that Social Security says that you can collect your total benefit or your full benefit. And that is referred to as the PIA, or the primary insurance amount. So when you look at a Social Security statement, this is the amount that you will get at your full retirement age. Okay? And the other term is called claiming. This is when you actually file to receive your Social Security benefits. There were some other phrases referred to as file and suspend or restricted. You don't see those very much anymore from the standpoint that Social Security Administration has simplified the rules to kind of take away some of these benefits that the people who could afford to delay would take advantage of. So these are the three primary terms that we're going to be using. Click again. So what are the rules? One is that once both spouses have claimed, the spouse with the lower claim becomes eligible to receive up to 50% of the amount that the primary spouse will have been able to claim. I'll talk about that more, but that becomes, you know, no matter whether the spouse worked or not, they're still eligible to get 50% of the primary's insurance amount if they claim at full retirement age. Look again. So you can see that claiming decision by primary is going to impact the amount received by the spouse. And again. And there's a survivor benefit, and I will focus on that in a few minutes. Okay, go ahead. So let's talk about this first rule, the discount rule. The first question is, at full retirement age, like I said, the Social Security Administration shows your primary insurance amount. This is what you'll get. If you claim earlier, and of course, it looks complicated. This is really pretty simple to program, but if you file early, you're going to get a reduction. Why? Well, it only makes sense because if you're going to get more payments up to some actuarially assumed age that we'll all live to, and that's around 85 for the Social Security Administration. You know, if you're going to file earlier, you're going to get more payments. So to make it even out, the Social Security Administration has set up this complicated set of reductions and premiums if you're going to file after the full retirement age. So it really does make sense, but people need to understand the rules, and very few people do. Click. So here's an example. Assume that assume, you know, that the primary person, so we call whoever, whenever you collect your own Social Security, we call that own. Assume that the primary is going to receive $2,500 a month. Okay, so if own claims a year early, then own only receives $23.33 a month. If own claimed at 62 and he was born in 1954, so he would have had to have claimed already a couple years ago, then he would only receive $18.75 a month. And click. And if own claims at 62, born in 1960, and I'll explain why I use this, then own would only collect 70% of the primary benefit, or only $1,750. So you can see how that discount works. Click. So here's a chart that I've created that gives you kind of an idea. So I'm just using over on the right side, this is full retirement age, FRA, so for own, and SB is spousal benefit. And I'll explain that. So for now, just focus on the birth year on the far left. And you can see full retirement ages going from the bottom in 1952 up to 1954 is 66. And then it moves up to 67, phasing in. That's why I used 1960 as my other reference point, is because the Social Security Administration has acknowledged that people are living longer, and they needed to make an adjustment for that fact. So they're starting to phase in. Full retirement age used to be 65, they moved it to 66, and they're going to scale in to make it 57 years old. So that's the first thing to look at. Click. The next is to take a look at what happens then with the discounts from early claiming. And again, if you take a look under 62 for own, for the primary earner, today, if you were to claim and you were born in 1954, okay, if you claimed at 62, you would get a 25% reduction. You would get 75% of what your PIA was. If you claim in 1960, if you were born in 60 and you claim at 62, then you'll only get 70%. So you can see that with this shift by the Social Security Administration in those claiming ages, you see that the discounting becomes even greater. Click. So on top of the primary, we look at the spouse. Okay. Again, the spouse can collect 50% of the primary's PIA benefit. Okay. If the spouse is already getting or is can receive even more from that, then the spouse has the option. The spouse can file and then restrict and let their own primary earnings grow. Their own earnings grow up till age 70, and they can still get 50% of the primary's benefit. Okay, so that's the one exception that works out the benefit of filing and then kind of suspending for this restriction. But that's very small number of cases. In most cases still today, the spouse is going to receive 50%, they might be getting their own, which is going to be lower than 50%, but they can then get up to 50% of the primary's benefit. In essence, husband and wife can get 150% of the benefit that the primary earner would be receiving, which is kind of a nice deal. So consistent with the primary's benefit reduction, we also get a reduction in the spousal benefit on top of it. So let's take a look at an example. Click. Okay, so let's assume that again, the primary gets $2,500 a month and the spouse claims as well, then the spouse will get $1,250. So if the spouse claims early, a year before the spouse's full retirement age, then that benefit is reduced to $1,146. And if they collect at 62, which oftentimes becomes a recommended age for spousal benefits, then you can see again, a fairly significant discount starts to occur. Okay. So now we see a discount at the primary level and we're seeing a discount for the spousal benefit. So what happens when we combine them? Click. Well, we can go on from there. This just shows what I just showed in the slide before. So why don't we keep moving on? This is what happens when everybody files early. You get bad news on top of bad news. So click, please. So let's assume again that both claim at full retirement age and they both get the full amount, 100% of primaries PIA and 50% of the primaries PIA. And again, we're using that $2,500 level. So the couple can get $3,700.50 or $3,750 a month, okay? But let's assume they're just born in 1960 and they claim at 62. Then the primaries level of claim drops from $2,500 to $1,750, as I showed before. And we now use that $1,750 for the spousal benefit instead of $2,500. So now with that lower base level and a reduction as well in what the spouse can get from 50% down to 35%, now the spouse's portion drops from $1,250 to only $569. So the combination ends up with a dramatically lower level of $2,320. This is less than 62% of the benefit that they both would have had they just waited till the full retirement age. If you think about this on an annualized basis, what that means is that the couple might have been receiving $45,000 a year had they waited till full retirement age. Instead, they're only going to be getting $2,780 a year, $27,800 a year. It's a really significant discount. That's what kind of goes towards this problem of poverty as people age and health benefits or health issues start to arise, other problems start to arise, and they've eaten through all the rest of their assets. This is a primary concern and one I think that we all have to really understand when we're working with our clients. Click, please. So what about delayed claiming? You know, I've been focusing so far on the problem of claiming early. So what happens if you delay in your claim instead of taking at 67 or 66 right now and wait for a year, 2 years, 3 years? Well, this is even nicer. What happens is you get 8 percentage point additional for each year you delay based on your PIA at your full retirement age. So we always use that as the reference point. So if you've got a client who was born in 1960, okay, and their PIA is $2,500 a month, if they wait a year, then that $2,500 will go to $2,700. If they wait 2 years, it goes to $2,900. If they wait 3 years till they're 70, it goes to $3,100. It doesn't help to wait any longer than that. Okay. The other thing that's kind of interesting, however, is that the spousal benefit doesn't go up. It's only going to stay at 50% of that initial PIA. So it's really, the focus goes on the primary for any additional growth. But the part that I find that's kind of fascinating, if you back that up a minute, Greg, thank you. If we take a look at that claim at 70, what we really see is that that growth rate on a compounded basis is 7.4%. And because Social Security is taxed at 85% on a post-tax basis, if we're comparing it to this decision that people often make, that say, I'm going to take my Social Security early and I'm going to let my retirement assets grow, that means that your retirement assets have to be growing at a rate in excess of 8.7%, almost 9% rate of return every year, which I think is a very optimistic and unrealistic assumption on a year-to-year basis for making this delay issue. So, that kind of puts that into perspective, why waiting and delaying is really a good thing to think about. Click, please. It's even more ironic when I think of this issue is that the Social Security Administration actually is encouraging the delay, because you can see kind of there's a kink up in the benefit that you get for delaying on that claiming decision. You get a higher and higher. I think the Social Security Administration is really hoping that those late claimers are going to be dropping dead from joy when they see their first benefit check. But this is the problem. We got almost all of our claims are coming well before full retirement age, and very few come after retirement. Click. So what about survivor benefit? Again, I said earlier that the majority of people, couples, one of them is going to be widowed for an extended period of time. So the survivor benefit is the equal of the higher of either the spouse's or the primary's claim at the time of death. And there is no deduction if spouse had claimed early. So, for example, if spouse claimed at 62, 66, or 70, it doesn't make a difference. If primary was receiving $3,000 a month at death, then spouse is eligible to receive either that amount or whatever their own amount would be if it's higher. Okay, so it's, again, advantageous for the primary or whoever the higher earner is to delay as long as possible to help spouse in case primary does die first. Click, please. Here's the example of that. Let's assume, same case, $2,500 a month. Let's assume that the principal in the blue line had filed at 62. If principal dies, let's just assume a 2% COLA, dies at 75, then principal would have been receiving $27,000. At the same 75, if principal had delayed until full retirement age or at 67, then principal would be receiving almost $39,000 a year, and had principal delayed until 70, they'd be receiving $48,000 a year. You can see that difference from 27 to 48. And if we look out for 15 years, which I think is 75, that's only going to 90, okay? And the odds are that the number of years of survivor benefits is going to be even greater, but you can already see those cumulative benefits, what an enormous difference they are. Click. So the question is, when should we claim? In summary, well, elderly and single widowed women face an increasing danger of outliving their retirement assets. So Social Security really is going to become the primary source. Claiming before full retirement age leads to a significant discount in what the survivor is going to have. So it isn't just the couple's combined income, it's also, you have to think about what the survivor's income is also going to be. Primary claimants still anchor at 62 or at their retirement point. Very few people claim longer than full retirement age. So the benefit, especially if spouse anticipates outliving the primary by more than 10 years, says that primary needs to delay at least until full retirement age to be fair to their spouse if they can. Now the problem is, if spouse's benefit is greater than the survivor, or the spouse's benefit is greater than the primary benefit, I should have said that, but okay, I'm confusing things. If it's greater than the survivor's benefit, but it's still less than the primary. In other words, if primary is getting $2,500 a month and spouse is getting somewhere between $1,250 and $2,500, then we get some more complicated math going on. So here are some sources that you can always look for. You can use the AARP site. It's simplistic, not as good, but it's a good starting point. Much better is Kotlikov's Maximize My Social Security. He's done a ton of research into this area. So this is a great site to look at all scenarios. Another good source is called the Social Security Income Planner, where you can say, okay, we are just a couple individually and we are only looking for, this particular strategy. It costs only $5 to get access to that site, or you can look at all strategies, again, for $50 for if you're an advisor. There's another system called the Social Security Timing Software for advisors only. And then there's some free options that are pretty good. Financial Engines, of course, up in the Bay Area, and Open Social Security. Those are good, really good, I think much better than the AARP sources to understand in your particular situation when you should claim. Now, of course, there's going to be problems with understanding how am I going to bridge the gap and what's going to go on. So I'll talk about that in the second half of this series next week. So thank you. If there's any questions, I'm free to take them.
Mark, this is Jolly. I do have a couple questions.
Okay.
So the first question was, in the early slides, you have talked about different possibility of taking Social Security retirement benefits. And I think that there are some misconception. Some people are claiming early primarily because they are thinking about getting their health insurance. Would you talk about the difference between the timing of receiving Medicare and the timing of the retirement benefits? For example, if you claim at 62, do you actually get Medicare?
Okay.
Okay.
All right. And that's a really good question, because it is confusing as hell. You can file for Medicare at 65 or the 3 months prior to your 65th birthday. And Medicare makes it confusing as the devil. They make it think that at that time, if you haven't filed already for Social Security, that you need to file for Social Security because they take the Medicare benefits out of your Social Security check. So that leads oftentimes to people thinking, okay, if I'm claiming Medicare, I also have to claim my Social Security, which is erroneous. So that becomes one of the problems with how people at Social Security, because you have to file with Social Security to get your Medicare card. So I think that becomes one problem. The other problem is for people who are filing even earlier. You can't get Social Security unless you are disabled until you are 65. So even if you file for Social Security early, you have to continue to find a way to fund your insurance. So, that becomes especially pernicious for people who end up having to leave the workforce because of health reasons. For the people, this is why I said for some people, when they get incentivized packages from their employer to retire early, the employer will then give them their health benefits until they hit 65 as a motivator to retire early. And that becomes, again, one of those problems where it's kind of a literacy issue. And again, I'll address that next time.
Okay, thank you, Mark. The second questions that I have is, so based on what you are presenting today, you're saying, I love you, honey, so I'm going to delay as much longer as possible. So I'll get the survival spouse will get the maximum amount possible under the current situation. But what if a retiree or somebody who simply don't have enough while they wait until that delay? Do you have any recommendations for people who wants to delay the claiming, but they don't have enough to cover those living expenses while they wait?
Okay, we'll talk more about that next week.
Okay.
But I mean, offhand, there are a variety of issues. One of them was from a series of articles that have talked about wise tax planning that really points out, especially for people who have between $200,000 and say $800,000 in retirement savings, that they're far better off to already start drawing down from their qualified plans prior to age 70 and a half, when they will have to take out money because of, we call this the kind of the tax donut hole for Social Security. So what you want to do is start to draw down instead from your qualified plan before you start taking from your Social Security, at least the amount that you might have been drawing down from Social Security. So that becomes one source. Another source is if you do have any other financial assets. Again, if you delay on your Social Security, it's like earning 10.5% prior to full retirement age on a year-to-year basis, if I'm comparing that to my taxable. So you really want to think about, okay, can I draw from my financial assets, what I have? You can also look at, this is going to sound, people get upset about the word reverse mortgage. Reverse mortgage, the mortgage or your home equity, for most people in the situation that you've just mentioned, Jolly, their primary source of wealth is in their home. So a reverse mortgage does allow you to tap into that. And there are an increasing number of people, despite the journalist stories of bad news, who have come out and said, no, that's wrong. Reverse mortgages will actually help you to sustain your retirement along with a delayed Social Security benefit. Another is actually working. We've put in this mental image of 65 as our retirement age because we can get Medicare at that point. But there's nothing magical about that. And we see an increasing number of people who are choosing to delay their retirement because they recognize, what the heck am I going to do over the next 30 years? They're recognizing the fact that this isn't their parents' generation. They're going to be living longer. So those are just three of the solutions of what people can start to think about instead of drawing early.
Okay, thank you, Mark. One last question, and I know that we are running, this is a popular topic, and we potentially might run a little bit over for today's session. So the last question that I have is, most people do not know there is a cap for Social Security retirement benefits. So that's assumed somebody who makes a lot of money during their working years, and their no matter what they do, they're always going to have a maximum or hit the maximum Social Security retirement benefits. Would you have any type of recommendation if at some point delaying doesn't make any sense, especially for those who are receiving maximum of the retirement benefits?
Well, that's one of those oddities. There's a certain point for people who are, the very highly wealthy. Delaying really doesn't benefit them at all, again, because of the tax situation. So, it's almost as if they are almost better off actuarially if they claim early. But the amount that Social Security is going to mean to them, unless their assets are totally tied up in non-fungible sorts of assets, so the wealth of a business or something. But for most of the time, for these people, drawing early isn't really going to make much of a difference. It actually may make more on an after-tax basis, make more sense. But I don't think that it doesn't really matter a whole lot to them to do the delay. I think where the delay, again, and this is where the planner is so important, to take a look at all of the sources of retirement income and put them into the context. Because what we do is we plan out the way we should build our retirement income plan. What do we need for post-retirement income? Starts with all of your annuities. And that annuity, the primary annuity that most of us are ever going to have, is our retirement, is our Social Security benefit, because it's going to grow with inflation, where our pensions, or if we've purchased an annuity on top of it, may not grow with the inflation rate. So for the majority of us, we still will start with that at that bottom level, and then we'll have built our assets to accommodate the rest of that for our whole retirement future. So we'll build from that, but for the ultra wealthy, it's just not quite as relevant. Okay?
Thank you, Mark.
Any other questions?
Linda, I see that you have your hand raised. Did you have a question, or was it maybe
I do.
addressed?
I have a question. Mark, could you talk about, please, the impact of somebody who earns a fairly nice salary and they decide to claim early? And what does that do with their benefits?
Well, the first thing is, between that early claim and the full retirement age, you end up losing a big portion of the Social Security benefit at that time. So in essence, if I file early and I'm still earning money, then the Social Security Administration says, okay, well, you can earn as a couple maybe up to $15,000, $16,000. And then after that, for every additional dollar you earn, we're going to take out $1 of your Social Security benefit that you're filing to claim. Now, you'll get it back again at a future date after full retirement age, or when you stop working again. But at that time, you may have filed early. You may be thinking you're going to get $27,800 from Social Security each year, but because of these income levels of still working, that number is going to go down. And it can go down fairly dramatically, down to half that level. Okay, so that becomes kind of this, almost a disincentive to claim early if you're still working. So that doesn't go away till you hit full retirement age. And then at that point, you can work till your heart's content and still get your full benefit. But you won't get that benefit, you won't realize the full benefit until that point.
So then, Mark, can you get a do-over if you claim early and realize your mistake?
If you're within 1 year, you can say, okay, I messed up, give me a do-over. After that, the rules no longer apply that you could get a do-over and pay it back. At that point, then you're kind of stuck. So you've got a year to go back in and say, sorry. If you can always suspend, however. Say you filed at 62 and at 64 you get a job. The economy is improving. You can suspend at that point and then start working again, and then your Social Security will stop at that level, and then will start to grow at those percentage. You had a discount. You will give back some of that discount. Now, it won't go back up to the full PIA that was on your Social Security statement, but you can suspend for a while and then grow your benefit at the rate of, at those growth rates that you had diminished before. Okay, so you might get another, if you work for a year, you might get 7% more. If you work for 2 years, you might end up getting 15, 16% more when you stop working again. So you can do, that's not a do-over, but that's a suspend that would help if you go back to work.
Thank you.
Brett, I see that you have your hand up. Did you have a question as well? Here, let me see if I can unmute you and make it a little easier.
Hi. So in a lot of senses, I'm a prototypical client, and I think, going long short by meaning if the lower paying spouse stops working, having them claim first is the way to go, and the higher paying spouse should delay to 70 and a half. And thank you for talking about the do-over rule, and then the suspension was new. I mean, personally, my spouse and I are just kind of staying in the labor market part-time to keep our skills from eroding. But the real question, sorry for babbling, is, Mark, do you have any real fear of Social Security? I think that 15% is going to be taxed pretty soon, but any sort of means testing and people getting frozen out of Social Security because the government believes at a certain level you don't need it anymore?
If you go back to thinking about things from the standpoint of a behavioral finance, we have this issue of an entitlement. An entitlement is something that's been given to you or to have been promised to you. And I'll tell you, even if you haven't been receiving it yet, if you've got this assumption of a promise and then it gets taken away, it has so much more value than it might really have had. Even for the wealthy who don't need Social Security, there's still, I paid into the system, there's a real value to this, and there's an entitlement. And at the end of the day, those are voices that are heard by the politicians. So I think right now, there's this discussion, and the media, as far as I can see, journalists don't like to do nearly as much research as they should. So this becomes a popular topic. So they will talk about reducing the benefits. I don't think that becomes feasible at all. What I think will become politically feasible is this. Right now, there is something that is being floated to the Social Security Administration by the advisory board that will, let me get rid of this, by the advisory board that instead changes some of the rules of maxing out, as you earn more and more, then you don't have to pay into Social Security anymore at a certain threshold, maybe $130,000. There's talk of lifting that cap and of slightly increasing the percentage that goes in, with the recognition that Social Security has almost replaced the fact that we're no longer getting pensions, defined benefit pensions. So with that recognition, there's talk of increasing, in fact, the amount of Social Security that might get paid. And I don't see anything right now that is coming out of Washington that talks about means testing, which would go in the opposite direction. But there's no guarantee when it comes to politics, but I doubt it will occur.
Thank you. Kimberly, I see your hand is up as well. Did you have a question?
Thank you, Mark. This is very informative. The question that I have, I would like for you to clarify if an individual waits to full retirement age to file and they start collecting, and then they find this great job and they start making, let's just say, $200,000 a year, would that Social Security benefit be taxable?
Oh, not once. It's going to be taxable up to the level that the benefit itself is going to be taxable once you start to earn, whether it's a job or whether it's just taking out your required minimum distributions, whether it's capital gains that you're taking out of that portion of your portfolio, if you've sold your house and take a large capital gain. Social Security is still going to be taxable above a certain threshold. Okay, it starts off at a lower level of Social Security is taxable, and then up to 85% of your benefits are still going to be taxable as long as you are still collecting them. So if you are above, so you're not going to have your benefit reduced at all. The only thing that will change is it becomes taxable up to 85%. For most people who have planning clients, you might as well just acknowledge the fact that if you can afford a planner, you're probably going to be, that level is low enough that we're all going to have our benefits taxed at 85% of the benefit will be taxable. So that's kind of that's an assumption that I think is a pretty safe assumption. Now, if you get that great job, you can suspend your benefit and let it grow. So if you're 60, say you filed at 67 and you get a great job at 68, you can suspend and that benefit will again grow at that 8% for those next 2 years, 69 and 70, and then it won't grow anymore except by the COLA factor. So you can suspend and still have that benefit grow while you've got this great job. So that would be a better thing to do, but it's all going to still be taxable down the road if you've done a good job of saving for retirement.
Thank you. That was very interesting. If there are no more questions in the interest of time, we'll wrap it up. So I wanted to thank all of you very much for coming today and giving us your time and listening. And Mark, I want to thank you immensely for giving us your time today and knowledge. Please, if you're interested in everything we've been talking about and would like to learn more, Mark Edwards is one of our full-time faculty members with the financial planning program at California Lutheran University. We have two tracks, if you will, that we offer. There's the MBA in financial planning and an MS in financial planning. The MBA focuses on business and practices for management skills for working professionals, and our MS really focuses on the art and science of financial planning and client communication. If you're also interested in learning more about what we talked about today, please tune in next week as we will be having part 2 of Mark's discussion. And it seems like there's a lot of questions and a lot of interest in this. So we look forward to joining you same time, same place next week. And thank you so much again, everyone, for your participation.